What if consciousness isn't something that suddenly appears, but something that slowly awakens? Modern science can describe how stars are born, how planets form, and how life evolves through natural selection. It can tell us remarkable things about the chemistry of living cells and the age of the universe. But there's a deeper question science doesn't yet answer. Why does consciousness exist at all? Why should matter ever become aware of itself? And if consciousness does it evolve randomly? Or does it follow some kind of universal pattern? According to the law of one, consciousness doesn't simply emerge. It progresses through an ordered series of experiences that Ra calls densities. Each density represents a new stage of awareness, a new lesson, and a new way of experiencing reality. It's a framework unlike almost anything found in mainstream philosophy or religion. Instead of humanity standing at the top of creation, we're described as being somewhere in the middle of an unimaginably vast journey. One that began long before human beings existed and continues far beyond what we normally think of as death. In our previous episode exploring what happens between lives, we briefly introduced the idea of densities while discussing the soul's journey after physical death. But that episode only scratched the surface. Today, we're going to slow down and explore the entire map. We'll look at why Ra describes consciousness as unfolding through eight densities, what distinguishes each stage from the next, and what this framework suggests about animals, humanity, higher intelligences, and even the future of our own planet. And don't worry, we won't be asking you to memorize eight cosmic levels before the end of the episode. There won't be a quiz, at least not until your next incarnation. Before we begin climbing this cosmic ladder, though, we need to understand something surprisingly important. Because despite the name, density doesn't mean what most people think it means. In fact, it's one of the most commonly misunderstood words in the entire Law of One. As Ra explains, the term density is what you would call mathematical one. The closest analogy is that of music, whereby after seven notes on your Western type of scale, if you will, the eighth note begins a new octave. Within your great octave of existence, which we share with you, there are seven octaves or densities. Within each density, there are seven subdensities. Within each subdensity, seven sub-subdensities, and so on infinitely. This excerpt contains one of the keys to understanding the entire philosophy. Rather than imagining reality as a stack of disconnected dimensions, Ra asks us to think of existence more like music. Each note is distinct, each note builds upon the last, and together they form a single continuous melody. So before we explore the first density, the very first flicker of awareness, we need to answer a deceptively simple question. What exactly is a density? If you've spent any time exploring spirituality, you've probably heard people talk about higher dimensions. The fourth dimension, the fifth dimension, sometimes even the 12th. It's become such a common phrase that it's almost part of the spiritual vocabulary. But according to the Law of One, that's actually not the terminology Ra chooses. Instead, Ra consistently uses the word density. At first glance, that seems like an odd choice. After all, when we hear density, we usually think about physics, how much mass is packed into a given volume. Lead is denser than wood. A black hole is denser than a planet. Not exactly the sort of thing you'd expect in a discussion about consciousness. But Ra isn't talking about physical density at all. Instead, the word describes the density of consciousness, the richness, complexity, and depth of awareness that a being has developed through experience. Think about your own life for a moment. You understand things today that you couldn't have understood as a child, not simply because you've accumulated more information, but because you've lived. You've loved, you've failed, you've made mistakes, you've lost people, you've forgiven others, and hopefully yourself. Your consciousness hasn't just learned facts, it's become denser. The experiences have added depth. According to Ra, the entire universe develops in much the same way. Not just human beings, everything. Every star, every planet, every living organism, every soul. They're all participating in an immense evolutionary process whose purpose is the gradual refinement of consciousness. And this is where Ra introduces one of the most beautiful analogies in the entire material. Instead of comparing spiritual evolution to climbing floors in a building, Ra compares it to music. As Ra says, the term density is what you would call mathematical one. The closest analogy is that of music, whereby after seven notes on your Western type of scale, if you will, the eighth note begins a new octave. Imagine sitting at a piano. You press a C, then a D, then E. Each note sounds different. Each has its own character. Yet none of them exists in isolation. Together they form a coherent scale. When you reach the eighth note, you're back to where you started. And yet, you're not. The note is familiar, but it vibrates at a higher frequency. It's the beginning of an entirely new octave. Ross suggests that consciousness unfolds in much the same way. Each density builds naturally upon the lessons of the one before it. Nothing is skipped, nothing is wasted. Every experience prepares consciousness for the next. And perhaps most importantly, no density is quote unquote better than another. It's tempting to think of higher densities as somehow superior, but that's a little like saying adulthood is better than childhood. An adult may possess more experience, but childhood isn't a mistake. It's a necessary stage of development. Without it, adulthood could never exist. The same is true throughout the cosmic ladder. First density isn't primitive, second density isn't incomplete, third density isn't broken. Each is exactly where it needs to be, which is reassuring because most of us are still trying to remember why we walked into the kitchen. This perspective also changes how we think about spiritual growth. Rather than trying to escape where we are, the goal becomes to fully experience where we are. According to Ra, every density has one central lesson, one great theme, one primary focus. Master that lesson, and consciousness naturally continues its journey. Rush it, and you'll simply keep studying until you've learned what you came to learn. And with that foundation in place, we're finally ready to begin at the very beginning. Long before there were animals, long before there were people, long before there were planets filled with life. According to the law of one, consciousness first awakened in the simplest places imaginable. If first density represents the beginning of consciousness, what does that actually look like? According to modern science, our universe began around 13.8 billion years ago. Over immense spans of time, gravity pulled together clouds of gas and dust, forming the first stars. Those stars forged heavier elements, which later became planets, oceans, mountains, and eventually the raw materials for life itself. It's an extraordinary story, but it's also a story told almost entirely in terms of matter and energy. The law of one doesn't disagree with that picture. Instead, it asks us to consider another layer. What if the physical universe is also the stage upon which consciousness gradually awakens? According to Ra, the first density is not the density of life as we usually think of it. There are no animals, no plants, no minds contemplating the stars. Instead, first density consists of the classical elements earth, air, fire, and water. Before we go any further, it's worth pointing out that these aren't necessarily meant as the literal four elements of ancient Greek philosophy. Rather, they represent the fundamental conditions and processes of the physical world, the solid ground beneath us, flowing water, moving air, radiant heat, geological activity, weather, and the countless interactions that shape a young planet. Ra describes first density in this way. The first density is the density of consciousness, the mineral and water life upon the planet, learning from fire and wind the awareness of being. That's a remarkable sentence. Notice what Ra doesn't say. Ra doesn't claim that rocks are sitting around thinking about existential philosophy. A pebble has never stared into the sunset wondering whether it should finally start journaling. Instead, the suggestion is far more subtle. The physical world itself is participating in the very first awakening of awareness. Mountains are shaped by wind, rivers carve valleys, volcanoes remake landscapes, minerals crystallize, oceans circulate, day turns into night, season follows season. Over unimaginably long periods of time, a world slowly becomes more ordered, more dynamic, and more capable of supporting increasingly complex forms of existence. From a scientific perspective, these are simply natural processes governed by physics and chemistry. According to the law of one, those same processes also represent the earliest chapter in consciousness learning to experience itself. Not self awareness, not intelligence, simply awareness. Awareness that existence is. Ra expands on this progression by explaining the second density strives toward the third density, which is the density of self consciousness or self awareness. That tells us something important about first density. If second density is striving towards self awareness, then first density hasn't reached that point yet. Its lesson is more fundamental, simply becoming, simply existing, simply laying the foundation upon which every later form of life will eventually emerge. It's easy to overlook the importance of this stage because it feels so distant from our everyday experience. After all, most of us don't spend much time wondering about the spiritual journey of granite. Although, if you've ever tried carrying landscaping stones, You'll probably agree that they're committed to staying exactly where they are. Yet, Ra's framework invites us to see the universe differently. Instead of a dead cosmos that somehow produced life by accident, it describes a living process in which even the earliest stages of planetary formation have meaning within a much larger evolution of consciousness. Whether one accepts that idea or not, it's a striking shift in perspective. The ground beneath your feet is no longer just the backdrop for life's story. According to the law of one, it's where the story begins. And eventually, from that foundation of earth, water, air, and fire, something extraordinary emerges. Life begins to move. At some point, a barren world changes. The oceans are no longer just water, the soil is no longer just rock. Life appears. According to modern science, this transformation took billions of years. Simple single celled organisms eventually gave rise to increasingly complex forms of life through evolution by natural selection. Over immense stretches of time came plants, forests, insects, fish, reptiles, birds, mammals, and eventually every ecosystem we see today. Science describes how this extraordinary diversity developed. The law of one explores a different question. What is consciousness learning through it? According to Ra, this is the beginning of second density. If first density was the awakening of awareness itself, second density is the density of growth. Life begins reaching, adapting, responding, seeking, but something is still missing. According to the law of one, second density beings are alive, but they have not yet developed what Ra calls self consciousness in the fully human sense. Ra explains the second density is the density of the higher plant life and animal life, which exists without the upward drive towards the infinite. That phrase, the upward drive towards the infinite, is an interesting one. It doesn't mean animals are incapable of affection, intelligence, or even remarkable problem solving. Anyone who's lived with a dog, a cat, or even an unusually clever crow knows they possess distinct personalities. Some recognize themselves in mirrors, some use tools, some grieve, some form lifelong friendships. Modern research has repeatedly shown that many animals experience rich emotional lives and surprisingly sophisticated cognition. The law of one doesn't deny that. Instead, it suggests that second density consciousness is primarily focused on living, rather than consciously asking the deeper questions that define third density. Questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What should I become? In other words, an animal experiences life. A human wonders about life. That distinction becomes especially important when Ra discusses one of the most beloved relationships in our lives, our pets. According to the law of one, animals that develop close relationships with humans may begin their transition toward third density through a process of individualization. Ra says, perhaps the most common occurrence of second density graduation during third density cycle is the so called pet. The animal which is exposed to the individualizing influences of the bond between animal and third density entity, this individuation causes a sharp rise in the potential of the second density entity, so that upon the cessation of physical complex, the mind body complex does not return unto the undifferentiated consciousness of that species, if you will. That's a remarkable claim. According to Ra, when an animal forms a deep relationship with a human through companionship, trust, affection, and shared experience, it gradually begins developing a stronger sense of individual identity. Not because humans are inherently superior, but because close interaction with a self aware being helps awaken that same capacity. It's a perspective that casts the human animal bond in an entirely new light. Perhaps the unconditional love we often receive from animals isn't only changing us. Perhaps, according to the law of one, it's changing them as well. Which means your golden retriever may secretly be working towards enlightenment, though probably right after chasing one more tennis ball. It's worth emphasizing that this isn't a scientific claim, it's a metaphysical idea unique to the law of one's framework. Science can observe animal intelligence, emotional attachment, and social behavior. Whether those experiences contribute to an evolving soul is a question that currently lies outside the scope of empirical research. But within Ra's cosmology, second density serves a profound purpose. It is consciousness learning through instinct, through growth, through relationship, through the countless experiences of living things adapting to an ever changing world. And eventually, something new appears. For the first time, consciousness doesn't merely experience life, it begins asking questions about itself. It becomes aware that it is aware. According to the law of one, that marks the beginning of one of the shortest and perhaps the most important stages in the entire cosmic journey, third density. If second density is life learning to grow, third density is life learning to choose. According to the law of one, this is where humanity finds itself today. Not at the end of evolution, not at the beginning, but a pivotal crossroads. It's here that consciousness undergoes one of the most dramatic transformations in the entire cosmic journey. Ra calls third density the density of self consciousness. For the first time, a being doesn't simply experience the world, it experiences itself experiencing the world. It begins asking questions that no tree, dolphin, or wolf has ever asked. Who am I? Why am I here? What happens when I die? Why do people suffer? Is there a purpose to any of this? These questions aren't accidents. According to Ra, they're exactly why third density exists. But there's one more ingredient that makes this density unlike any other: the veil of forgetting. In our episode on what happens between lives and others, we briefly explored this idea. According to the law of one, before incarnating into third density, souls pass through a veil that hides the memory of who they truly are. We don't remember previous lives. We don't remember planning this incarnation. We don't remember our larger spiritual identity. We arrive here with no instruction manual, which explains why adulthood often feels like being handed the controls to an aircraft halfway through the flight. At first glance, that seems unnecessarily cruel. Wouldn't spiritual growth be easier if we remembered everything? Surprisingly, Ross says the opposite. Before the veil was introduced, beings possessed a far greater awareness of their spiritual nature. But because the answers were largely obvious, their growth was also much slower. The uncertainty that we often dislike is, according to Ra, precisely what makes third density so effective. Faith becomes meaningful because certainty is absent. Compassion becomes meaningful because selfishness is possible. Forgiveness becomes meaningful because hurt is real. The veil transforms existence into something that resembles a genuine moral and spiritual adventure. Ra explains. The third density is a choice. Simple, only 6 words. Yet they may summarize the entire purpose of human life according to the law of one. Throughout countless experiences, relationships, triumphs, and heartbreaks, consciousness is gradually moving toward one fundamental decision. Will I primarily live in service to others or in service to myself? This doesn't mean occasionally being kind or occasionally being selfish. Everyone does both. Ra is describing a deep orientation of consciousness, a consistent direction that gradually develops over an entire lifetime, often many lifetimes. One path seeks unity through compassion, cooperation, and love. The other seeks power through separation, control, and domination. What's fascinating is that, according to Rob, both paths require extraordinary discipline. The positive path isn't for people who are merely nice. The negative path isn't for people who occasionally make bad decisions. Each represents a profound commitment to a way of seeing reality. Eventually, every third density soul polarizes strongly enough toward one orientation to continue its evolution. Perhaps the most surprising part of it all is how brief this density is. Ra explains. The choice is, as you put it, the work of just a moment, but is the axis point which the creation turns. Compared to the immense spans of time spent in later densities, third density is astonishingly brief. Why? Imagine learning to fly an airplane. Most of your time isn't spent deciding whether you want to become a pilot, it's spent actually flying. Third density is that decision. Everything afterward is learning what to do with it. That perspective changes the way we see ordinary life. Every disagreement, every act of forgiveness, every opportunity to help somebody, every temptation to manipulate, deceive, or control. According to the law of one, these aren't isolated events. They are opportunities to make the choice again and again and again. Not because the universe is keeping score, but because every choice slowly shapes the kind of consciousness we're becoming. It's one of the reasons Ra places so much emphasis on free will. Without genuine freedom, love would have no meaning. Neither would wisdom, neither would growth. The very confusion that frustrates us may also be the greatest gift this density has to offer, because certainty rarely transforms people, choice does. And according to the law of one, once that choice has been made, a new chapter begins. One where the central lesson is no longer choosing love, but learning to live it. Welcome to fourth density. If third density is about making the choice, Fourth density is about living with it. According to the law of one, once a civilization has become sufficiently polarized, it graduates into fourth density. But here's something that's often misunderstood. Fourth density isn't exclusively positive. It exists in both positive and negative forms. The destination depends upon the orientation that consciousness developed and chose during third density. Ra explains fourth density as being of either the service to others or the service to self polarity. Both paths continue evolving, both continue learning, but they learn very different lessons. Ra describes fourth density itself as the fourth density is the density of love or understanding. At first, that might sound a little strange. How can a negative civilization exist within the density of love? The answer lies in what Ra means by love. The positive path understands love as compassion, empathy, cooperation, and recognizing the creator within every other being. As positive fourth density civilizations mature, separation begins giving way to unity. Communication becomes increasingly telepathic. Honesty becomes natural because deception serves little purpose. Eventually, the societies develop what Ra calls a social memory complex, a civilization in which every member has access to the experiences and memories of the whole. Ra describes their own civilization this way. When a group of mind body spirits become able to form a social memory complex, all experience of each entity is available to the whole of the complex. It's a remarkable picture of cooperation, but fourth density negative develops very differently. Rather than expressing love through compassion, it expresses what might be described as an intense love of self. Power is refined, control becomes increasingly sophisticated, hierarchy becomes stronger. Instead of seeking unity through cooperation, negative fourth density societies seek unity through domination. Each individual strives to increase its own power while controlling those beneath it. Even here, however, there is discipline. There is commitment. There is an extraordinary focus of will. The negative path is not portrayed by Ra as simple cruelty or chaos. It's a highly ordered pursuit of separation. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of the Law of One is that both civilizations continue evolving for a time. Both are learning, both are growing, both are exploring the consequences of the fundamental choice made in third density. But the two paths are gradually moving toward very different understandings of reality. One discovers that unity comes through serving others, the other attempts to perfect separation through serving only the self. Both, though, have common attributes associated with the density as a whole. Ra explains. We ask you to consider as we speak that there are no words for positively describing fourth density. We can only explain what is not and approximate what is. Beyond fourth density, our ability grows more limited still until we become without words. That which fourth density is not. It is not of words unless chosen. It is not of heavy chemical vehicles for body complex activities. It is not of disharmony within self. It is not of disharmony within peoples. It is not within limits of possibility to cause disharmony in any way. Approximations of positive statements. It is a plane of a type of bipedal vehicle which is much denser and more full of life. It is a plane wherein one is aware of the thoughts of other selves. It is a plane where one is aware of the vibrations of other selves. It is a plane of compassion and understanding of the sorrows of third density. It is a plane striving towards wisdom or light. It is a plane wherein individual differences are pronounced, although automatically harmonized, by group consensus. Ra themselves belonged to a positive fourth density civilization that once lived on Venus that eventually continued evolving into higher densities. As for Earth, the law of one suggests that our planet is presently going through the long transition into fourth density. Whether one accepts that claim is, of course, a personal decision. But within Ra's cosmology, humanity isn't approaching the end of its journey. It's approaching the consequences of the choice it has been making all along. And regardless of which path is taken, fourth density eventually reveals the same lesson. Love alone is not enough. To continue evolving, consciousness must also develop wisdom. That is where fifth density begins. If fourth density teaches consciousness how to love, fifth density teaches it how to love wisely. According to the law of one, this is the density of wisdom. Ra states simply, the fifth density is the density of light or wisdom. That might sound straightforward, but wisdom in the law of one isn't simply intelligence. It's not accumulating facts. It's not having a higher IQ. It's the ability to perceive reality with extraordinary clarity, to understand consequences, to recognize the deeper patterns beneath experience, to know not only what should be done, but when. One of the interesting things Ra points out is that both positive and negative beings continue into fifth density. Just as in fourth density, the two paths remain distinctly different. Positive fifth density entities seek ever deeper understanding so that their compassion becomes more effective. Love without discernment can unintentionally create dependency. Mercy without perspective can sometimes prevent growth. Positive wisdom learns that helping another doesn't always mean removing every obstacle from their path. Sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing another being the freedom to learn through experience. Negative fifth density entities pursue wisdom for an entirely different reason. Having already refined power and control during fourth density, they now seek greater knowledge, perception, and efficiency in service of the self. Interestingly, Ra describes fifth density negative entities as becoming far less interested in direct confrontation. Instead, they often prefer subtlety, strategy, manipulation. Knowledge itself becomes power. It's the cosmic equivalent of realizing you don't have to win every argument, you just have to know you're right. Not only that, but fifth density negative is very separated. Ross states, the fifth density negative is extraordinarily compacted and separated from all else. Perhaps the most striking difference between fourth and fifth density is the atmosphere itself. Fourth density is deeply social. Civilizations are learning cooperation, whether through positive unity or negative hierarchy. Fifth density, however, becomes far more contemplative. Ra describes fifth density entities as spending immense periods of what we might call study, reflection, and refinement. There is less activity, less urgency, more quiet observation. It's as though consciousness steps back from the intensity of experience to understand what all those experiences actually meant. This helps explain something we've encountered in several previous episodes. When Ra describes many advanced beings contacting humanity, or choosing not to contact humanity, they often emphasize an extraordinary patience. From our perspective, waiting hundreds or even thousands of years seems unimaginable. From the perspective of fifth density, those spans of time are simply part of the natural rhythm of evolution. Time itself is experienced very differently. Ra also notes that fifth density beings possess an even greater ability to work with what they call light. Their understanding of consciousness, energy, and creation has become extraordinarily refined. Yet, despite all of this wisdom, something is still missing. Imagine someone with perfect understanding but no compassion. They could calculate every outcome, predict every consequence, analyze every possibility, but they might never reach out a hand to help another. Likewise, imagine boundless compassion without discernment. Every problem would invite immediate rescue. Every hardship would seem unfair. Yet, some hardships are precisely what allow consciousness to grow. According to the law of one, neither love nor wisdom reaches its fullest expression in isolation. Each reveals the limitations of the other. And that realization prepares consciousness for what Ra considers one of the greatest turning points in the entire octave, the sixth density, the density in which love and wisdom finally become one. If fourth density teaches love and fifth density teaches wisdom, then sixth density asks a profound question. Can either truly exist without the other? According to the law of one, the answer is no. This is sixth density, the density in which love and wisdom are finally balanced into a single way of being. Ra says, the sixth density is the density of unity. That single word, unity, changes everything. Throughout the earlier densities, consciousness has been learning individual lessons: awareness, growth, choice, love, wisdom. Now those lessons begin weaving together into something greater. Love without wisdom can become blind. Wisdom without love can become cold. Unity requires both. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of sixth density is that this is the density Ra identifies as their own. Early in the contact, Don Elkins asks a simple question about who, or what, Ra actually is. Ra replies, we are not those of the love or of the light. We are those who are of the law of one. In our vibration, the polarities are harmonized, the complexities are simplified, and the paradoxes have their solution. We are one. This is our nature and our purpose. Later, Ra explains more specifically that they are a sixth density social memory complex. This helps explain the tone that many readers notice throughout the material. Ra rarely commands, rarely persuades, rarely insists that anyone believe them. Again and again, they defer to free will, offer information, then step back. It's a communication style built not on authority, but on respect for each soul's journey. It's also probably why Ra never says, just trust me, bro. Sixth density is also where one of the most fascinating developments in the entire law of one occurs. The negative path comes to an end. This doesn't happen because negative beings are defeated, nor because they're punished. Rather, according to Ra, they encounter a philosophical problem that can no longer be ignored. A path founded upon separation eventually reaches a density founded upon unity, and those two principles cannot ultimately coexist. Ra explains. The sixth density negative entity is extremely wise. It observes the spiritual entropy occurring due to the lack of ability to express the unity of sixth density. Thus, loving the creator and realizing at some point that the creator is not only self, but other self as self, this entity consciously chooses an instantaneous energy reorientation so that it may continue its evolution. It's one of the most beautiful passages in the entire material. Notice that Ra doesn't describe this as a failure, nor as a defeat. The negative path has carried consciousness as far as it can possibly go. But eventually, the realization draws that there are no others left to separate oneself from. Every being, every civilization, every star, every experience, every joy, every sorrow, all are expressions of the same infinite creator. The illusion of separation has reached its limit. And so the journey continues, not through conquest, but through reunion. Not only a reunion of all things, but the reunion of love light and light love. Ra explains it in this passage. In sixth density, the density of unity, the positive and negative paths must needs take in each other, for all now must be seen as love light and light love. This is not difficult for the positive polarity, which sends love and light to all other selves. It is difficult enough for service to self polarized entities that at some point the negative polarity is abandoned. This also sheds light on something we've discussed in previous episodes. The wanderers who incarnate on Earth are frequently described as coming from fourth, fifth, or sixth density. Many, according to Ra, come from sixth density specifically. Having already learned the lessons of unity, they voluntarily enter the confusion of third density in order to serve others and help ease the planetary transition. Not because they must, but because they choose to. It's a striking inversion of how we think about spiritual advancement. The more consciousness evolves, the less concerned it becomes with elevating itself, and the more naturally it seeks to elevate others. Yet, even sixth density is not the end. As vast as its understanding may be, as unified as its consciousness has become, the journey continues onward, toward a destination that even Ra describes with remarkable humility, the seventh density, the final movement before the music begins again. By the time consciousness reaches sixth density, the great lessons have largely been learned. Love and wisdom have become one, the illusion of separation has dissolved. So, what comes next? According to the law of one, preparation. Ra refers to seventh density as the density of foreverness. It is the final stage of experience before consciousness completes the octave and returns fully to the infinite creator. Ra says, the seventh density is a density of completion and the turning towards timelessness or foreverness. Also, the seventh density is the gateway density. The phrase gateway density is an intriguing one. A gateway doesn't represent a destination, it represents a transition, a threshold. By this point, consciousness is no longer primarily learning individual lessons. Instead, it is preparing for complete reunion with the source from which the entire journey began. Throughout the Law of One, Ra offers remarkably little detail about this density. That's not because it's unimportant. Rather, they repeatedly suggest that such realities are difficult, perhaps impossible, to describe from our present perspective. Imagine trying to explain music to someone who has never heard sound, or color to someone who has never possessed sight. Some experiences cannot simply be translated into language, they must be lived. Even Ra, despite speaking from sixth density, approaches these higher stages with noticeable humility. Again and again, when discussing the later portions of the octave, they acknowledge the limits of what they know. I think that's worth pausing on for a moment. One of the things that makes the Law of One unusual is that Ra rarely presents themselves as all knowing. There are questions they decline to answer, questions they say they cannot answer, and questions whose answers they believe would infringe upon our free will. It's refreshing, really. Even advanced civilizations apparently know when to say, that's above my pay grade. Then comes perhaps the most beautiful idea in the entire cosmology, The octave ends, but existence doesn't. Just as the eighth note on a piano is also the first note of a new octave, Ross suggests that consciousness begins again at an even greater level of reality. The journey isn't a straight line, it's a spiral, each cycle returning to unity, only to begin a new exploration from an entirely new perspective. It's a breathtaking image, a universe that is never truly finished, an infinite creator continuously discovering itself through endless new expressions of consciousness. And if that raises one final question, what lies beyond even the eighth density? You're not alone. Don Elkins asked that question too. Raw's answer was characteristically humble. They simply didn't know. Or at least not in a way they could meaningfully communicate. Sometimes the deepest wisdom isn't found in having every answer. It's found in recognizing that mystery itself may be part of the design. And perhaps that's fitting. Because if consciousness can continue unfolding forever, then every ending is also a beginning. So, what do we make of all of this? According to the law of one, consciousness doesn't suddenly appear. It unfolds from the first stirrings of awareness in the physical world to the growth of life, to the awakening of self awareness, to love, to wisdom, to unity, and finally, to a return to the infinite creator. Whether one accepts this framework literally, symbolically, or simply as an interesting philosophical model, it offers a striking way of looking at existence. Instead of seeing life as a random collection of disconnected events, it suggests that every experience, every joy, every hardship, every relationship, every loss, may be participating in a much larger process of growth. Perhaps that's why the law of one places so much emphasis on the present moment. Not because today determines your worth, but because today shapes your direction. One conversation, one decision, one act of kindness, one moment of honesty. According to Ra, these seemingly ordinary moments are where consciousness evolves. It's also worth remembering something we discussed earlier. Third density is astonishingly brief. Compared to the immense stretches of evolution that follow, this chapter is over almost as soon as it begins. If the law of one is correct, then this lifetime isn't the finish line. It's one page in an unimaginably long story. That perspective can be strangely comforting. Our mistakes don't define us forever. Our successes don't complete us. Every experience becomes another opportunity to learn, another chance to refine who we are becoming. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson hidden in the idea of densities. They're not a cosmic ranking system. Higher doesn't mean better. No one looks down on a child for not yet being an adult. No one criticizes a sunrise because it is not yet noon. Every stage has its purpose, every lesson has its season, every density contributes something essential to the whole. In the end, perhaps the most important question isn't, what density am I? It's a much quieter question. How am I choosing to live today? Am I becoming more honest, more compassionate, more courageous, more willing to understand someone who sees the world differently than I do? Because whether or not the law of one describes the universe exactly as it is, those questions remain worthwhile. Ra closes every session with a similar simple blessing. I leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. Go forth then, rejoicing in the power and in the peace of the one infinite creator. Adonai. It's a fitting way to conclude this episode as well. Not as a declaration that we've reached the top of the ladder, but as a reminder that we're all still climbing. Thank you for watching or listening. I wish you all love, light, peace, and joy. Take care.